There is something that happens to a man when he is disrespected in public that most people fundamentally do not understand. Not his friends, not his partner, not even the man himself in many cases. It is not anger, although anger is often part of it. It is not embarrassment, although that is part of it too. It is something deeper and more structural than either of those things. Something that does not resolve itself when the moment passes. Something that quietly reorganizes the way he sees himself, the way he moves through the world, and the way he relates to the person who put him in that position. And the reason most people do not understand it is because the people who study relationships and write about them and talk about them publicly have spent decades treating male dignity as either a punchline or a problem to be managed rather than as a legitimate psychological reality with real and measurable consequences. My name is Miss Anna, and today we are talking about the dignity gap. What it is, why public disrespect hits men differently than almost anything else, and why most men never fully recover from it when it comes from the woman they love. Let's start with what dignity actually means in the context of how men are psychologically constructed. Because this is not about ego in the shallow sense of the word. It is not about men needing to feel superior or needing to be right all the time or needing to be worshipped. It is about something much more foundational. For most men, dignity is the baseline sense that they are respected as competent, capable, and worthy of basic regard by the people around them. It is not something they think about consciously when it is intact. It functions below the surface, the way a foundation functions below a building. You do not notice it when it is solid. You only notice it when something damages it. And the critical thing to understand about male dignity is that it is profoundly social in its architecture, meaning it is not just about how a man feels about himself in private. It is about how he is regarded in the presence of others. A man can absorb a significant amount of private criticism, private disappointment, even private conflict, and still maintain his fundamental sense of himself. But public disrespect operates on an entirely different level because it does not just affect how he feels, it affects how he has been seen. And for a man, being seen as diminished in front of others is not a recoverable event in the way that private conflict is. It leaves a mark, not just on his self-image, on the social reality of who he is in relation to the people who witnessed it. This is why men respond to public disrespect with a disproportionate intensity that often confuses the people around them. A woman might say something dismissive to her partner at a dinner with friends and genuinely not understand why he is so cold for the rest of the evening and distant for days afterward. From her perspective, she made a comment, maybe it was a little sharp, maybe she should not have said it, but it was one moment and it is over, and why is he still making it a thing? What she does not understand is that from his perspective, something happened at that dinner that cannot be undone. The people at that table saw her treat him in a way that communicated, publicly and unmistakably, that she does not fully respect him. And that information is now part of how those people understand who he is. He cannot take it back. She cannot take it back. It exists. And he has to carry that. Now let me talk about why this is particularly devastating when it comes from a romantic partner specifically. Because public disrespect from a stranger or a colleague, while genuinely unpleasant, does not carry the same weight. A stranger does not know him. A colleague occupies a limited portion of his life, but his partner is the person he has chosen above all others. The person whose opinion of him is supposed to matter most, the person in front of whom he is most vulnerable. And when that person chooses to diminish him publicly, the message is not just that she thinks less of him in that moment. The message is that her regard for him is low enough that she is comfortable displaying that publicly, that she does not feel the need to protect his dignity even in front of other people, that the version of him she is presenting to the world is a lesser one. That is not a small thing. That is a fundamental breach of what a partnership is supposed to provide. And most men experience it as exactly that. A breach, not a mistake, not a bad moment, a breach. Something that revealed something true about how she sees him that he cannot now unsee. Let me make this concrete with an example. Call him David. He is 44, has been with his partner for 6 years. They are at a gathering with mutual friends and someone at the table asks him about a decision he made at work. Before he can finish his answer, she cuts in, corrects him on a detail, makes a joke at his expense that gets a laugh from the table, waves off something he says with a dismissive gesture. From the outside, it looks like nothing. Couples banter, normal relationship texture. But David goes quiet for the rest of the evening. On the drive home, she asks what is wrong. He says nothing. And for the next 2 weeks, something is different. He is present but not there. Engaged but not warm. And she cannot figure out what happened. What happened is that David went through something at that table that she does not have a framework for understanding. He was diminished in front of people whose opinion matters to him. And the person who did it was the person whose job it was to have his back. That experience did not end when they left the gathering. It is sitting in him, reorganizing things quietly. And the coldness she is feeling from him is not punishment. It is distance. The natural protective response of a man who has learned, through direct experience, that he is not safe with her in public, that she will not protect him, that she may even use him as material. And once a man learns that, he does not unlearn it. Now here is where the dignity gap becomes a relationship-destroying mechanism rather than just a painful, isolated incident. Because most women, when they sense the distance that follows public disrespect, do not connect it to the event. They experience it as him being cold, withdrawn, punishing, emotionally unavailable, and they respond to it the way people respond to those things, with frustration, with their own withdrawal, with demands for explanation that he struggles to provide because what he is feeling does not translate easily into the kind of verbal emotional processing that the conversation requires. He knows something shifted. He knows trust was damaged. But the path from that dinner table to a clear, articulate conversation about dignity and breach and what he needs in order to feel safe again, that path is not obvious for most men. And so the gap widens, without either of them fully understanding what they are widening it over. This is the dignity gap, not just the moment of public disrespect, but the persistent, compounding distance that forms in its aftermath. The gap between who he was before that moment and who he is in the relationship after it. The gap between the level of openness and investment he had before and the protected, measured version he maintains afterward. And here is the brutal reality about that gap. For most men, it does not close, not fully, not without a very specific kind of acknowledgement and repair that almost never happens, because most women do not understand what they did, and most men cannot articulate what they need. What most couples do instead is move forward without addressing it. She eventually stops noticing his coolness because it becomes the new baseline. He eventually stops feeling the acute pain of the original event because time dulls it. But the gap remains, underneath, quietly structuring the limits of how close he will allow himself to be, how much he will invest, how fully he will show up. And years later, when the relationship feels hollow and distant and neither of them can identify exactly when it changed, the answer is often traceable back to a moment at a dinner table, a comment at a party, a joke made at his expense in front of people who mattered, a moment when she chose her own comfort or her own humor or her own frustration over his dignity, and he absorbed it and never fully came back. Now I want to talk about why most men never recover from this, because I do not think it is inevitable. I think it is the result of a specific set of conditions that make recovery nearly impossible, even when both people would genuinely prefer it. The first condition is the absence of acknowledgement. For a man to begin recovering from public disrespect, he needs the person who disrespected him to understand what actually happened, not to apologize for being mean, not to say sorry you felt bad, but to genuinely understand that a specific thing occurred that damaged something real, that her behavior in that public setting communicated something about her regard for him that he cannot ignore. That the impact was not sensitivity on his part, but a legitimate response to a real breach. Most women never offer this acknowledgement because they never understand what they did. They saw a moment of banter. He experienced a public diminishment. Without a shared understanding of what the event actually was, genuine repair is not possible. The second condition is repetition, because rarely is it a single event that does the lasting damage. It is the pattern. The first time it happens, a man might absorb it, might attribute it to a bad day or a thoughtless moment. But by the third or fourth or fifth time, the conclusion he reaches is no longer this was a mistake. It is this is who she is when she does not think the consequences matter. And that conclusion, once reached, is almost impossible to dislodge because it is supported by evidence. Repeated, consistent, witnessed evidence. The third condition is the social permanence of the damage. Unlike private conflict, which exists only between two people and can theoretically be resolved and contained, public disrespect has witnesses, and those witnesses carry what they saw. A man cannot control the narrative that exists in the minds of the people who were at that dinner table. He cannot retroactively reframe how he was seen in that moment. The social reality of his diminishment exists independent of anything he or his partner does afterward. And knowing that, living with that, is a weight that does not simply lift because the relationship moves on. The fourth condition is the impossibility of the conversation, because what a man needs to say after public disrespect is not something that fits neatly into the emotional vocabulary that most couples use to navigate conflict. He needs to say something like, "You showed the people we care about a version of me that I cannot get back, and that breach is going to take a long time to heal, and I need you to understand the weight of that." But what often comes out instead is nothing, or something cold and flat that she experiences as withholding. And the conversation that needs to happen never does. And the gap remains. So what does repair actually require? Because I want to be clear that I am not saying this damage is permanent by nature. I am saying it is permanent in practice because the conditions for genuine repair are almost never created. Genuine repair requires the woman to initiate a specific kind of acknowledgement, not a general apology for being difficult or for the relationship being tense. A specific acknowledgement of what happened in that specific public moment, what she did, what it communicated, why it mattered to him, and a demonstrated understanding that his response was not oversensitivity, but a legitimate reaction to something real. That kind of acknowledgement is not common. It requires a level of ego flexibility and genuine empathy for how men experience dignity that most people, men and women alike, have simply never been taught to access. It also requires the man to be willing to articulate what he needs clearly enough that she has something to respond to, which requires him to develop a language for an experience that most men process in silence. That is also not common. But it is possible, and in the relationships where it happens, where the acknowledgement is made and received and the articulation happens and the repair is genuine, the dignity gap can close. Not instantly, not without discomfort, but over time with consistent evidence that the breach was understood and that his dignity is now something she actively protects rather than casually risks. For the women watching this, the clearest thing I can offer you is this. The moments that feel smallest to you in public are often the moments that land hardest on him. A joke at his expense that gets a laugh from the table is not neutral. Cutting him off in front of people is not neutral. Correcting him publicly on something small is not neutral. These things register, they accumulate, and the man who is warm and open and fully present today can become the man who is measured and distant and quietly gone 6 months from now, not because of a dramatic event, but because of the slow accumulation of moments where you chose something else over his dignity. And he noticed. Every single time. That is it for today. Let me know in the comments whether this resonates with your own experience, whether you are a man who has lived this or a woman who is seeing it from the other side for the first time. I want to hear your honest thoughts. If you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe because there is a lot more of this coming. My name is Miss Anna, and I will see you in the next one.